There's a moment, just before everything changes, when the world feels completely normal. The air is calm, the sky is familiar, the sounds around you are predictable, comforting even. And in that moment you feel safe, not because you've checked for danger, but because nothing seems wrong. But danger rarely announces itself. It doesn't knock. It doesn't warn. It simply arrives. And when it does, it's already too late. It was supposed to be a perfect day. The kind of day that feels almost scripted, clear skies stretching endlessly overhead, sunlight pouring gently across a quiet landscape. The kind of day where nothing bad is supposed to happen. Daniel remembered that feeling vividly. Later, he would replay it in his mind again and again, trying to pinpoint the exact second everything began to unravel. But at the time, there was no sign, no hint, no crack in reality. The camera was already rolling. Not because anything important was happening, but because Daniel liked documenting small moments, the ordinary ones, the kind people usually forget. A quiet neighborhood street, trees swaying lightly in the wind, a distant hum of everyday life, and somewhere in the background laughter. It was peaceful, almost peaceful. Then something changed. Not dramatically, not instantly, just subtly. A shift in the air, a strange heaviness. The kind of feeling you can't explain, but your body notices it before your mind does. Daniel paused. The camera tilted slightly. "Do you feel that?" he asked. There was no response at first. Just silence. Then, a distant sound. Low, unfamiliar, growing. At first, it didn't make sense. It wasn't thunder. It wasn't wind. It was something deeper, something alive. The sky darkened, not gradually, but unnaturally fast. Shadows stretched across the ground like ink spilling over paper. The sunlight that once felt warm now seemed distant, fading. And then they saw it. Far off in the distance, a shape, massive, rotating, moving. It didn't look real. Not at first. Because your brain doesn't immediately accept something like that. It tries to rationalize it, to shrink it into something familiar. But this wasn't familiar. The tornado was already forming, and it was heading straight toward them. Panic doesn't always come as a scream. Sometimes it's quiet, frozen, unbelieving. Daniel didn't run immediately. None of them did. Because for a few seconds they couldn't. They just stared, watching something impossible become real. "Get inside." The words came suddenly, urgent, sharp. And just like that, the illusion shattered. Everything that followed felt faster than time itself. The camera jolted violently as Daniel ran. Footsteps pounded against the ground. Voices overlapped, fear, confusion, disbelief. The wind picked up. Not gently, violently, like the air itself had turned against them. Doors slammed. Windows rattled. The world outside began to tear itself apart. Inside the house, everything changed. The light disappeared almost instantly. Darkness swallowed the room. And then, the sound. There are no words that truly capture it. It wasn't just loud. It was overwhelming. A deep, roaring chaos that felt like it was coming from everywhere at once. The walls shook. The floor vibrated. The air pressure shifted so violently it felt like the house itself was breathing, struggling. Daniel's hands trembled. The camera still recording, capturing everything. Even the things no one would want to remember. Somewhere nearby, someone was crying. Another voice whispered something, maybe a prayer. And then, a crash. Something outside had collapsed or been ripped away. It was impossible to tell because the noise drowned out everything. Time stretched. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt like hours. And through it all, there was one terrifying realization slowly settling in. They had no control. None. This wasn't something they could stop, or escape, or reason with. This was nature at its most raw, its most indifferent. And then, just as suddenly as it began, it passed. The silence afterward was worse. At first, no one moved. No one spoke. Because silence, in that moment, didn't feel safe. It felt wrong. Like something was missing. Daniel finally stood up. Slowly, carefully, as if even movement might break whatever fragile calm had returned. The camera followed, still recording, still capturing. He walked toward the door, each step heavy, uncertain. And then, he opened it. The world outside was gone. Not damaged. Not broken. Gone. The street that once felt so familiar had vanished beneath debris. Trees were ripped from the ground like they were nothing. Houses, homes filled with memories, laughter, lives, were reduced to fragments. Scattered. Unrecognizable. Daniel stepped forward. the camera trembling in his hands, trying to process what he was seeing, what he was asterisk standing in. This was all here, he whispered, his voice barely audible, not because of the noise, but because of the disbelief. Moments ago, this was a neighborhood. Now, it was something else entirely. Something unrecognizable. And that's when it hits you. Not during the chaos. Not during the fear. But after. When you realize how quickly everything can disappear. How fragile everything really is. How thin the line is between normal asterisk and gone asterisk. But this wasn't the only moment. Not even close. Because across the world, at different times, in completely different places, people were experiencing the same terrifying truth. That life doesn't always give you warnings. Sometimes it gives you seconds. And sometimes, not even that. Daniel's story was just one. One moment. One event. One reminder. But there are others. Stories where the danger wasn't visible from miles away. Where it didn't roar across the sky. Where it didn't give you time to run. Stories where everything looked normal. Right up until the very last second. And in the next part, we're going somewhere very different. A place where people go to feel alive, to have fun, to escape fear. But what happens when the thing meant to bring excitement becomes something far more dangerous? A moment of thrill, a loss of control, and a descent that no one could stop. There's a certain kind of thrill that people chase. It's not just excitement. It's not just adrenaline. It's something deeper, something almost instinctual. The desire to feel asterisk alive. For some, that feeling comes from speed. For others, from height. And for a few, from surrendering control completely. That's what drew them there. A remote hillside, far from the noise of the city. A place where the air felt cleaner, the sky wider, and the world just a little more distant. It looked harmless, beautiful even. Rolling green slopes stretching toward the horizon, dotted with patches of rock and wild grass. The kind of place where laughter echoes easily, where fear feels unlikely. At the top of that hill stood something unusual. A massive, transparent sphere. Towering, still, almost surreal against the natural landscape. From a distance, it looked like a toy. Up close, it felt like something else entirely. Are you sure about this? The question was asked half-jokingly. The kind of hesitation people express when they're already committed. because backing out now would feel like admitting fear. And no one wanted to do that. Inside the sphere, two men prepared themselves. Straps tightened, hands adjusting grips, nervous laughter filling the confined space. The idea was simple. A step inside, I seal it, and roll. The sphere would carry them down the hill, bouncing, spinning, accelerating, while they remained safely enclosed inside. At least, that was the promise. From the outside, it looked harmless, even fun, a spectacle. People gathered nearby, phones ready, smiles wide. Someone shouted encouragement. "Let's go." And just like that, they were pushed. At first it was slow, a gentle movement, the sphere rocking slightly before committing to the slope. Inside, the men laughed. The motion was awkward but manageable, their bodies shifting with the curve, trying to find balance. Then gravity took over. The sphere picked up speed. Faster and faster. The laughter changed. Not gone, but different. Less controlled, more reactive. The hill blurred around them, the ground rising and falling beneath the transparent surface, each bounce more aggressive than the last. Inside, the world became chaos. Up was no longer up. Down didn't exist. Only motion. Outside, the spectators cheered. From their perspective, everything was going perfectly. Exactly as expected. But something wasn't right. The sphere drifted slightly to the left. A subtle, barely noticeable at first. Then more. "Hey!" A voice shouted from the outside, a concern creeping in. The designated path was straight, controlled, safe. But the sphere was no longer following it. Inside, the men felt it before they understood it. The change in direction, the uneven terrain, the sudden increase in impact. A bounce harder than the rest. Their bodies slammed against the interior. The laughter stopped. What's happening? Another impact. A stronger, more violent. The sphere veered further off course, now clearly heading toward the edge of the hill, toward terrain that wasn't meant for this. Outside, the energy shifted instantly. Cheers turned into shouts, then into panic. "We stop it. We stop it." But how do you stop something like that? The sphere was no longer a ride. It was a runaway force, driven by gravity. Unpredictable, uncontrollable. It hit a bump and launched. For a brief moment, it left the ground completely. Inside, everything slowed. Just for a second. That strange, surreal pause where reality seems to hold its breath. Then, impact. The sphere slammed back down. Hard. Rolling faster now. More aggressively. Inside, the men were no longer trying to enjoy the ride. They were trying to survive it. Their bodies collided with the walls repeatedly. Limbs twisting. Air knocked from their lungs. Every second more disorienting than the last. Outside, someone ran, trying to intercept, trying to do asterisk something. A man positioned himself ahead of the sphere, bracing, timing it. For a moment, it worked. The sphere slowed, just slightly, enough to create hope. But hope doesn't always last. The force was too strong. The sphere pushed past him, relentless, unstoppable. And then, it crossed the line, beyond the safe zone, beyond the intended path. Now there was nothing ahead but rough terrain. Rocks, drops, unpredictable ground that turned the descent into something far more dangerous. The speed increased again, even faster than before. From a distance, it looked smaller now, rolling further away. But the danger was growing. Inside, time had lost all meaning. There was no sense of direction, no control, no stability, only impact after impact. And then, the inevitable happened. The sphere hit something solid. A rock. Large. Unforgiving. The collision was violent. Enough to alter its trajectory completely. It bounced. Hard. Then continued rolling. But something had changed. The structure of the sphere was compromised. Not visibly at first, but enough. Inside, the damage was already done. By the time the sphere finally came to a stop, it was almost silent. No laughter, no movement, just stillness. It had traveled nearly a mile, far beyond where it was ever meant to go. Rescuers arrived quickly, running, calling out, trying to get a response. When they reached the sphere, they already knew. One of the men was unconscious, barely breathing. The other wasn't moving at all. What started as a moment of excitement had turned into something else entirely. Something irreversible. Later, reports would explain what went wrong. Minor miscalculations. Environmental factors. A slight deviation that turned into disaster. But explanations don't change outcomes. Because in moments like these, it doesn't take much. Just a small shift, a tiny error, a fraction of misalignment, and suddenly, you're no longer in control. That's the part people don't think about. Not really. We trust systems, designs, safety measures. We believe that things are asterisk tested, that risks are minimized, that someone somewhere has accounted for everything. But reality doesn't always follow plans. Sometimes it breaks them. And when it does, it doesn't ask for permission. It just happens. The hillside returned to silence, as if nothing had ever occurred. The wind still moved through the grass. The sky remained unchanged. But for those who were there, nothing felt the same, because they had seen it, felt it, experienced the exact moment when fun turns into fear and control turns into chaos. But not all dangers come from motion, or speed, or gravity. Some are watching you, silent, patient, waiting. In the next part, we move into the wilderness, a place where humans are not always at the top of the food chain. Two friends, a quiet trail, and something in the shadows that was never supposed to get that close. There's a certain kind of silence you only hear in the wilderness. It's not empty. It's not peaceful. It's watchful. People often imagine nature as an escape, a place to breathe, or to disconnect, to feel free. But nature doesn't exist for us. It doesn't adapt to our presence. It doesn't care if we feel safe. Because out there, you're not the observer. You're part of the environment. And sometimes, you're not alone. The trail stretched quietly through the forest. Tall trees lined both sides, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into scattered beams. The ground beneath was uneven, covered in dirt, roots, and the occasional patch of fallen leaves. It was the kind of place that felt untouched, raw, alive. Mark and Ethan had been running for nearly half an hour. Not racing, not competing, just moving, letting the rhythm of their footsteps carry them forward. Their breathing was steady, controlled, the kind of calm that comes from routine. "Let's slow it down for a minute," Mark said, slightly out of breath. Ethan nodded. They both eased into a walk. Moments like this were why they came here. No noise, no traffic, no distractions. Just the sound of their footsteps and the forest around them. At least, that's how it felt. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The wind moved gently through the trees. Leaves rustled softly. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. Then, a silence. Not gradual, not subtle, immediate. The kind of silence that doesn't belong. Ethan stopped walking. Did you hear that? Mark frowned. Hear what? That's the thing, I didn't. It's strange how quickly the absence of sound can become unsettling. Your brain expects noise, background life, a movement. But when it disappears, something feels wrong. Mark turned slowly, scanning the trees. Probably nothing, he said. But his voice lacked certainty. And then, they saw it. At first, it was just movement. A shift between the trees. Dark. Low. Then it stepped forward. A black bear. Not far. Not distant. Close. Too close. It didn't charge. It didn't make a sound. It just walked. Slowly. Deliberately. Mark's body went rigid. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Don't run, Mark whispered. Every instinct screamed otherwise. Run. Get away. Create distance. But instincts can get you killed. The bear continued moving toward them. Its eyes fixed. Unblinking. Calculating. There's a common misconception about moments like this. That animals act on impulse. That they're unpredictable. Chaotic. But predators aren't chaotic. They're precise. This wasn't random. The bear wasn't just wandering. It was watching. Ethan slowly stepped closer to Mark. Stay together, he said under his breath. They stood side by side now, trying to appear larger, stronger, more threatening. The bear stopped. For a moment, everything froze. No movement. No sound. Just three living beings, locked in a silent standoff. The distance between them felt impossibly small. Every second stretched thin. Fragile. Hey, Mark shouted suddenly. His voice sharp. Loud. Breaking the silence. The bear didn't flinch. It tilted its head slightly, almost curious. Ethan raised his arms, trying to look bigger. Go, he yelled. Still. Nothing. The bear took another step forward. Closer now. Too close. This wasn't bluffing. This wasn't fear. This was assessment. Predators don't attack blindly. They evaluate. They test. They decide. And in that moment, Mark and Ethan realized something terrifying. They weren't just being watched. They were being judged. "Back up slowly," Mark whispered. They began to move. Carefully, deliberately, not turning their backs, not breaking eye contact. The bear followed, not rushing, not aggressive, just matching them, step for step. It was patient, and patience is what makes predators dangerous. Ethan's voice trembled. "Why isn't it leaving?" Mark didn't answer, because he knew. This wasn't about territory. This was curiosity. Or worse, opportunity. "Stay together," Mark repeated. They tightened their formation, shoulder to shoulder, trying to present themselves as one solid presence. The bear stopped again. Its gaze shifted between them, analyzing, deciding. Then it stood up. Not fully, but enough. Its size became undeniable. Towering, powerful. Ethan's heart pounded violently, every instinct screaming louder now. Run. But they didn't, because they couldn't. Running would trigger something primal. A chase. A reaction they wouldn't survive. So they stood, frozen, waiting. Seconds passed, then minutes. And finally, something changed. The bear lowered itself. Its posture relaxed. Slightly. It took a step back. Then another. Still watching. Still aware. But retreating. Slowly. It turned and disappeared into the trees. Just like that. Gone. The silence returned. But it wasn't the same. It felt heavier. Mark exhaled sharply. Only then, realizing he'd been holding his breath. Ethan looked around. Still tense. Still expecting something to come back. "Is it gone?" Mark nodded slowly. "I think so." But neither of them moved. Not immediately. Because something like that doesn't end when the danger leaves. It stays. In your body. In your mind. In the way your heart refuses to slow down. They eventually walked back. Faster than before. Not running. But not relaxed either. Every sound felt amplified. Every shadow suspicious. Because once you realize how close you were, you don't forget it. Later, people would say they handled it well. that they did the right things, that they were lucky. And they were. Because not every encounter ends like that. Sometimes the outcome is very different. And sometimes there is no second chance. Out there, survival isn't guaranteed. It's negotiated. Moment by moment. Decision by decision. And sometimes the difference between life and death is measured in seconds. But what if the danger isn't natural? What if it's not instinct, but human error? A place controlled, managed, designed for safety, until one mistake changes everything. In the next part, we step onto a film set, a controlled environment, a scripted moment where everything was planned, except what actually happened. There's a certain illusion that exists on a film set. Everything looks real. Every detail is carefully designed. Every movement planned. Every moment rehearsed. But none of it is supposed to be asterisk dangerous. That's the agreement. The unspoken contract between reality and fiction. Actors pretend. Directors guide. Cameras capture. And behind it all there's control. Or at least, there's supposed to be. It was early morning when they arrived. The light hadn't fully settled yet, soft and gray, stretching across the open landscape. A quiet stillness lingered in the air, the kind that exists just before a long day begins. The crew moved with purpose, setting up equipment, checking angles, preparing for the shot. To anyone watching from the outside, it might have looked chaotic. But it was. It was organized, precise. This wasn't their first shoot. They knew what they were doing. Or at least, they believed they did. The location was unusual. A set of train tracks cutting through a remote stretch of land, weathered steel rails extending endlessly into the distance, surrounded by trees, isolated, quiet. Too quiet. All right, let's move this into position. The director's voice cut through the morning air. Confident. Decisive. At the center of the setup was a hospital bed. Old, metal framed, placed directly on the tracks. It was part of the scene. A surreal sequence. Something meant to feel dreamlike. Unreal. Ironically, that's exactly what it would become. Crew members adjusted its position carefully, aligning it with the rails, checking the camera angles, making sure everything looked right. Roll camera test. A voice echoed. The camera operator lifted the rig slightly, framing the shot, adjusting focus. From the lens, it looked perfect, cinematic, beautiful even. The kind of shot audiences would never question, because they'd assume it was safe, controlled. But assumptions can be dangerous. Far in the distance, there was a sound, faint, almost unnoticeable. At first, no one reacted. Why would they? Train tracks exist everywhere, and trains don't always come. But this one was, and it was closer than they realized. Did you hear that? One of the crew members paused. The sound came again. Low, rhythmic, growing. This time, more people noticed. Heads turned, eyes scanning the distance. And then, they saw it. A train, moving fast, too fast. For a moment, no one moved, because it didn't make sense. This wasn't supposed to happen. There had been assumptions, permissions, miscommunications. Some believed the tracks were inactive. Others thought they had clearance. But reality doesn't follow assumptions. Get it off the tracks. The command broke the stillness. Panic spread instantly. Crew members rushed forward, grabbing the hospital bed, trying to lift it, move it, do something. But panic slows you down. Hands fumbled. Movements became chaotic, uncoordinated. The bed was heavier than expected, awkward, difficult to control. The train was getting closer, the sound now deafening, a roar that filled the air. Leave it, just leave it. Someone shouted, but not everyone let go. Because in moments like this, people hesitate, not out of stupidity, but out of instinct, responsibility, panic, and sometimes that hesitation costs everything. The train was seconds away now. There was no time. Some crew members ran. Others froze. A few kept trying. And then, impact. The sound was violent, explosive, metal colliding with unstoppable force. The hospital bed was thrown violently backward, twisted, shattered. But it wasn't just the bed. The force of the impact turned it into something else. A projectile, unpredictable, deadly. In a split second, it struck one of the crew members. The impact was immediate, brutal. There was no time to react, no time to process. One moment, She was there. The next, she was. The camera captured everything. Not intentionally. Not for storytelling. But because it was already recording. The moments before. The panic. The chaos. And then. Nothing. The footage cut abruptly. But what it didn't show was just as devastating. The aftermath. Silence fell over the set. Not the peaceful kind. The kind filled with shock and disbelief. People stood frozen, trying to understand what had just happened, because it wasn't supposed to happen. This wasn't part of the script. This wasn't planned. But it was real. Emergency services arrived. Voices filled the air again. Urgent. Frantic. But it was already too late. What started as a controlled environment had turned into something else entirely. A reminder that control is fragile, that even in places designed for safety, things can go wrong, terribly wrong. Later, investigations would reveal the details. Miscommunication, lack of proper authorization, ignored warnings, mistakes, small ones, the kind that don't seem significant in the moment, until they are. Because sometimes it doesn't take a massive failure, just a series of tiny ones, stacking quietly until they collapse all at once. And when they do, the consequences aren't small. They're irreversible. The film was never the same. The people involved were never the same. Because some moments don't fade. They stay, echoing, a constant reminder of what happens when control slips, even for a second. But not all dangers are fast. Not all of them are loud. Some build slowly, silently, growing stronger, while everything still looks normal, until suddenly, it's not. In the next part, we return to nature. But this time, it's not a single moment. It's something bigger, something unstoppable. A force that doesn't just threaten one life, but thousands. And when it arrives, there's nowhere to run. There are some dangers you can see coming. A shadow in the distance. A sound that doesn't belong. A warning that gives you just enough time to react. And then there are others that arrive quietly, not as chaos, not as destruction, but as something almost ordinary. The day began like any other. Sunlight stretched across the neighborhood, warming rooftops and glinting off windows. The streets were calm, lawns freshly cut, trees standing tall, their leaves shifting gently in the breeze. It was the kind of place people chose for safety, for stability, for peace. A place where nothing bad was supposed to happen. Inside one of the houses, a man stood near the window holding a camera. Not for any particular reason, just habit. He liked capturing small moments, simple ones. Outside, everything looked perfect, almost too perfect. Rows of houses stood neatly aligned, clean driveways, well-kept gardens, children's toys scattered across front yards. And beyond it all, open land, wide, endless. The sky above was clear, but not completely. Far in the distance, there was something, small, barely noticeable, a faint distortion in the horizon. The man adjusted the camera slightly, zooming in. "What is that?" he muttered. At first, it didn't look like much. Just a smudge against the sky. Something you might ignore without a second thought. But then, it moved. Slowly, deliberately. And as it did, it grew. The shape became clearer, darker, more defined. It wasn't a cloud. It was something else. Something massive, rotating. The man's posture shifted. Subtle at first, but noticeable. Because deep down, he already knew. "Hey," he called out, his voice tightening slightly. "You might want to come see this." Footsteps approached from behind. Another pair of eyes looked through the window. And then, a silence. The kind that follows realization. That's not good. The tornado wasn't far anymore, and it was coming straight toward them. There's a moment in situations like this where your brain tries to slow everything down, to process, to understand. But reality doesn't slow down for you. It keeps moving. And this was moving fast. "Should we leave?" someone asked. But it was already too late for that. The distance had closed too quickly. The window for escape gone. "Get inside now." The urgency in his voice was different this time. Sharper, more certain. The camera shook slightly as he moved. Doors shut. Locks clicked. The outside world, once calm and predictable, began to shift. The wind picked up. Not gradually. Suddenly. Tree branches bent violently. Loose objects lifted from the ground. The sky darkened. Not like evening, but like something was swallowing the light. Inside the house, everything felt smaller, tighter. The air pressure changed. A strange, almost suffocating sensation. "Stay low," he said. "Stay away from the windows." The camera continued recording, capturing everything, even the fear. And then, it hit. The sound came first. A deep, roaring force. Not like thunder. Not like wind. Something else. Something alive. The walls began to shake. The floor vibrated beneath them. Outside, the world was being torn apart. Inside, time fractured. Voices overlapped. Fear rising. Is this going to hit us? No one answered. Because they already knew. It wasn't a question anymore. The house groaned under the pressure. Windows rattled violently. Something slammed into the side of the structure. Hard. The lights flickered, then went out. Darkness. Total. The only thing left was sound. The deafening roar of destruction. It felt endless, like the world outside had ceased to exist, like nothing would be left. And in that moment, there was only one thought. Will this end? Seconds passed, or minutes. No one could tell. And then, slowly, the sound began to fade. Not instantly, but gradually. The pressure lifted. The shaking eased. And then, a silence. But this silence was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, unnatural. The kind of silence that follows destruction. No one moved at first, because movement meant facing reality. And reality might be worse than anything they imagined. The man stood up slowly, the camera still in his hand, still recording. He walked toward the door, each step cautious, uncertain. And then, he opened it. The world outside was unrecognizable. The neighborhood was gone. Not damaged. Not partially destroyed. Gone. Houses reduced to debris. Trees uprooted. Cars overturned. Everything that once felt permanent had been erased. In minutes, the camera trembled. This was all here," he whispered. His voice cracked. Because no one is prepared for that. For seeing your entire world disappear. And then, he stepped outside. The scale of destruction became clearer. It stretched for miles. Not just his home, not just his street, everything. Neighbors emerged slowly, some injured, some in shock, all of them changed. Because moments like this don't just destroy places, they change people. They rewrite what safety means. They remind you that nothing is truly guaranteed, that control is temporary, and that sometimes the strongest forces in the world don't care who you are, or where you live, or how prepared you think you are. They just come, and when they do, they take everything in their path. But even then, the story doesn't end, because survival is only the beginning. What comes after can be just as difficult, and sometimes the most dangerous moments happen when you think it's already over. In the next part, we explore something different. Not nature, not accidents, but human reaction. Panic, fear, decisions made in seconds. That can change everything. Because sometimes the real danger is how we respond.